Welcome back to the Elle-Sera podcast. And today I've got Ali Houston from Metsci. We're going to get straight into what Metsci actually is. Hi, Ali.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thanks for joining me on the pod. So I've looked at your work ever since we connected on LinkedIn, and it was like an area of interest to me personally. And I thought my listeners would love to hear about this. And if I'm genuinely curious about something, definitely means other people will be too, and it's a better interview. So I was having a look at your work, and you do a lot of work around mental health and being able to fix a lot of what goes on with mental health with diet and exercise. You are talking my language. I am exactly the same. I truly believe that. With a caveat to, yes, there's a lot of people in the world who maybe have mental health issues for different reasons, trauma, past experiences, genetics, who knows. But I think there's got to be an argument for diet and exercise really helping. So tell me about your experiences with this yourself.
Yeah, I had chronic anxiety, seasonal depression, and ADHD symptoms from a young age. And every year after summer, I would feel, really anxious about the inevitable seasonal depression coming on. And it got really bad in 2013. Those kind of anxious, depressed thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. And I started to get a kind of suicidality, that feeling, even if you don't put it into words in your head, that there is one way to make it stop. And I was very disturbed by that. And it really pushed me to try as many things as I could to improve my mental health. So I've tried most things that people recommend: psychotherapy, counselling.
Did you go medication route?
I went medication route when I finally got a diagnosis, which was ADHD.
Right.
So in 2015, I was diagnosed as an adult, and they have to check your school report cards, and it says things like, would be such a better student if he just settled down, stopped distracting people, and not using his potential, all of that. So it was kind of a slam dunk diagnosis, and along with the questionnaires that they use. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily agree that the way they diagnose mental health disorders is the right way, because it's such a unique thing in medicine where they're basically ticking off a list of symptoms, many of which are common to other mental disorders. And it comes down to the psychiatrist or psychologist in front of you deciding. And another psychiatrist or psychologist might decide that you've got another thing or that you've got multiple things. But yeah, I did. I went on Ritalin, and at first it improved my focus, and the brain fog went away. I was able to apply myself a bit more, but quite quickly I needed to take more and more to get the same effect. And I was starting to get side effects like my temper was rising up, feeling anxious and angry.
Right.
And in the end, I just had to stop because it wasn't working for me. And I was a bit despondent because I'd assumed that the ADHD was the right diagnosis and that it would explain why I was anxious and depressed in the past, because I had these symptoms in life that was making me struggle, like lack of focus, brain fog, and so on. But actually my depression and anxiety were still there. In fact, the anxiety got worse with
the medication,
the stimulants. Yeah.
Right.
And the seasonal depression didn't go away. So in 2016, I'd originally been a physicist, actually. I'd studied English at uni at first and really hated it. You must have done...
I did English.
English, yeah.
English lit and history.
And I love books and films and that kind of thing, poems. But when I was having my 2,000 word opinion marked on it,
yeah,
I hated it. I felt like, like the patient died during the dissection. So I thought, right, what has one right answer? And I switched to maths and physics.
Right, okay.
And so I got a physics degree and then was working in physics in a laser factory. There's like 3 of them in Glasgow. I had no idea until I got my degree.
What kind of lasers?
Like kind of big lasers that cost like $250,000, and the ones I worked on, one of them was for microscopes in cancer research labs, and then the other one was ultraviolet light that was used to check for defects on silicon chips like Intel and that kind of thing. So I was kind of like a mid-level Bond villain henchman.
Okay, right.
And then I started a PhD in gravitational wave physics, and I wasn't performing well at all. I was struggling to concentrate. My depression and anxiety were worse than ever. That's when I got the ADHD diagnosis a couple of years into my funding for that. But my professor had, this hadn't gone unnoticed. He, a few years before, had, in his early 40s, been told he probably would never work again. He couldn't walk for more than about 50 yards without collapsing. He couldn't focus. He was bedridden, basically, with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome.
Right.
And the doctors couldn't help him. But he did his own research and found this book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by an American author called Gary Taubes. And it kind of advocates for a low carbohydrate diet and gives some good reasons why that might be helpful. So he tried that, and within 6 months, he was running 10Ks again.
Right.
So fast forward a few years to when I arrived, he saw that I wasn't performing to what my kind of background and CV might have suggested. And he was saying all this weird stuff like wheat isn't food, or nobody should be eating it. Margarine isn't really food. 5 a day was just invented by a marketing group. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But because he's a physics professor, I was kind of like, maybe there's something in this. I don't know. So I was asking him questions, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do or think, but why don't you go to these blogs, these books, and have a read? So I went down that rabbit hole and came up with the same conclusion that he had, that it was worth a try at least. So in March 2016, I switched to a ketogenic diet, totally believing the science that I'd read that it could be extremely healthy and I might be able to control my weight at least, which I'd struggled for a few years to control. And within a couple of weeks, my anxiety had basically quietened down to nothing. Mm-hmm. And my ADHD symptoms had just completely smoothed out. And I was saying to you before that there's some positives associated with ADHD, like feeling open to novel experiences and quite creative and lateral thinking. Those are still there. Mm-hmm. But the brain fog, all that sort of rejection, sensitive dysphoria, inability to organize my thoughts or focus properly, that's sort of gone down to almost zero.
Do you like taking risk?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think you can understand why some successful ADHD people are entrepreneurs, because there is that inherent risk and novelty seeking. And so I was astounded, because not only was I able to easily control my weight for the first time and feel full and satisfied, but I got my brain back, which I completely did not expect. And come the end of the summer, because I changed my diet in March, I thought, oh dear, well, here comes the slow freight train of seasonal depression again. And it just didn't appear. And for the first winter since I could remember, I felt really nice and had a good Christmas and it was amazing.
Yeah.
So I haven't really looked back since then. I was so kind of moved by the change in me. I decided to change career, and Ken, my professor, kind of encouraged me, and he kind of became more like my nutrition supervisor than my physics supervisor.
Right.
And we would sit and talk for hours about the nutrition science. And so since then, since 2017, I've been in this ketogenic space doing various things, starting off with food businesses and selling keto or sugar-free foods. and then moving on to health coaching, because people were asking me, what did you do? How can you do it? How can you maintain it? How does it all work? And I would help them. And then I decided to formalize that. I got a diploma in health coaching from a New Zealand company who I really like, and started my own coaching business, MetSci, which kind of brings us up to date.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that all sounds incredible, and I completely resonate with a lot of what you've said there. I haven't got a path into nutrition, nowhere near like that, but I was iron deficient, right, at one point.
Yep.
And she said, why are you iron deficient? What were you eating? And at that time, I'd like stopped eating red meat, wouldn't have orange juice, like blah, blah, because I was like, too much sugar, too much this, that, and the other. And also, I was having very, very heavy periods. And I just remember I used to go to the same cafe every day, and I used to get the same thing. And I always used to order a side of spinach. And I used to see the waitress come over, and as soon as my eyes hit that spinach, my mouth would start salivating. And I knew then, right? So when I then got diagnosed with iron deficiency, I was like, my body knew I was salivating for that spinach more before I did, right? Before I knew what was wrong with me. I just felt like shit and whatever. Yeah. And I was like, wow, ever since then, I have been an absolute convert to your food has a massive influence on the way you feel, 1,000,000%. So then, that was it. Literally that moment, I just completely changed my life. I got really interested in nutrition and health. And here we are today, 10 years later, maybe longer than that now, 15 years. So I completely get what you're saying. When you see that, like when you see evidence on yourself, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Completely.
And it's hard to explain that, isn't it? Because I can say I had this and now I don't, but it doesn't do it justice. The experience is, you have to experience an experience. Otherwise you have to come up with metaphors really to try to explain, and they still don't go far enough. So like some of our clients will say things like, the clouds of depression have parted and the sun's shining through again. You know, that sort of explains what it's done for them. Or it's almost like a religious experience where you feel like you're in a state of grace all of a sudden. And I think what's sometimes difficult about the idea that nutrition could affect physical and mental health so much is that if someone feels shit, it's hard to put that idea in their head about how good they could feel until they feel it themselves. Yeah.
I think weight loss is I know every female listening to this will be, if they wanted to do keto, all they've ever seen is people lose weight on keto. And then it's become like trendy Instagram, keto diet, keto diet, keto diet. You know, and big influencers promoting it. And they just want to do it completely for weight loss. And then they'll probably get to the weight that they want to get to, or not do it correctly, or not doing it for long enough. They might not get these experiences, and they might not get to where they want to get to. So tell me, for anybody listening who wants to try the ketogenic diet, what is it?
It's a great question. And I think people can wander onto a forum online or a group on Facebook and get dreadful advice that then puts them off doing something like that ever again, or maybe for 5 years. And it's such a shame because it's a missed opportunity. And we were talking about this as well, weren't we? That, you know, not everyone needs a ketogenic diet. I was saying about Weston Price, the dentist 100 years ago, a dentist and scientist who traveled the world looking at all these different societies. And there was some zero carb, carnivore, traditional people like the Inuit and the Maasai tribesmen who were just eating animal foods. But then there was all these other people who were extremely healthy and eating loads of carbs. So I'm not one to say that carbs are the devil. Yeah. But if someone is already metabolically unhealthy, they don't get enough energy, they easily put on weight, and that could be like 90% of the Western world, and probably similar in a lot of the global South. But the problem, like you've identified, is there's not one ketogenic diet. And so you can't just say the ketogenic diet. Just like when people see the Mediterranean diet, there's like hundreds of Mediterranean diets.
Yeah, and lots of different versions of.
And so I guess where I start with clients is to say, here's a list of foods that generally work with a ketogenic diet, which all that means is that you're restricting carbohydrates to the point that your liver starts to make ketones. And it's a perfectly natural process that happens when you're fasted or when you're eating higher fat and restricting carbohydrates, starch, sugar. And actually your brain prefers ketones for fuel.
Right.
And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. If you're a hunter-gatherer and you're struggling to catch anything for a day or two, then if you die straight away or stop thinking clearly, then you're not going to survive. So the people in our dim and distant past,
You like hunter-gatherers, it would tune up.
it would get better as time wore on. And that's what we find is that when ketones are there, you think more clearly, sharply, you feel good, you feel motivated. So all that scans, but your question, how do you do it? What is a ketogenic diet? I always start by saying, out of those foods, what do you really like? Because if you're going to do it sustainably, you better like it.
Yeah.
And I think the diet industry is awful for suggesting that people need to feel hungry all the time and that you must restrict calories in order to lose weight. But then people end up yo-yoing and craving, and it's a huge problem. One of the beautiful things about a well-formulated ketogenic diet is that those cravings go way down and that people feel satisfied, and that weirdly, some people eat 1,000 more calories a day and are still losing weight. And that's because the calories out part of the equation goes up. People feel warmer. They're wanting to exercise, and their brain is working over time, and the brain takes up so much energy.
Okay, going back to your point about ketones. Okay, so I see these things on the market called Ketonat, which are exogenous ketones, allegedly. It's like a sachet of sugary powder, it looks like to me. And they put it looks like electrolytes or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And they put it in water and whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Have you seen them?
Yeah, I've used exogenous ketones.
Have you used Ketonat though? Have you seen these? Because I see a lot of
that brand.
I see a lot of hairdressers selling them. And I'm like,
yeah.
You don't even know what they do.
Yeah, there's a multi-level marketing thing going on with some of the ketones, and you don't need to, if you wanted to see what it felt like to have ketones, then you could buy some sachets of ketones and see what you think. It's not totally clear from the studies that have been done yet. It's clear that people feel better, right, on a ketogenic diet. But is it because there's ketones, or is it because there's something else about doing a ketogenic diet that helps? And the fact that ketones are there are a bonus, or is it both? And I think it's probably both. And so just having exogenous ketones is probably not going to give you the full experience of doing a good ketogenic diet. But I mean, especially for people who find that hard, like people who find it really difficult to stay away from junk food, or people with, Alzheimer's, or, epilepsy, where you really need to keep the ketones high in order to feel the benefit, or people who have severe mental disorders who might do really well with ketones at a certain level, but the ketones drop when they're stressed or around exercise, or if their sleep's not been very good. Then having these sort of break glass in case of emergency keto sachets, or, you can get liquid ketones as well, can be a really good thing.
Okay.
So I'm not against them, but I don't think they're necessary.
I would like to see a third-party test done on them, me personally.
For sure, yeah.
Because I have seen a lot of third-party testing done recently on big brands that I know, and I'm shocked at what's actually in it, these like supplements and stuff. And I was like, oh, my God, I thought this was a good brand. So I I would like to see third-party testing because I just sometimes I do not believe what's on the label. A lot of these supplements and exogenous things it's the Wild West.
Totally.
So, you've got to get a company that does own third-party testing on themselves as well, I think. But to go back to what we were saying, so if I'm average Joe and I'm listening to this podcast right now and I've just bumped into a lady in John Lewis and I said, I'm doing a podcast. She said, who's your guest today? Blah, blah, blah. I was telling her, she went, oh, right, yeah. Explain to her what is a 100% best looking version of the ketogenic diet, according to you.
So the two ways to look at it, what's a food list that would fit and what are the macro ratios that would fit?
Okay. If you want to use me as an example, 1,600 calories a day keeps me slightly underweight.
Okay.
And I would go 40% protein.
Okay.
And I go 30-30.
Okay.
Fats and carbs.
Okay. So
is that a good ratio? Would you turn down carbs even further? Would you go 40-40-20?
It always depends exactly how you're measuring it, but I tend to focus less on counting the macros and more on choosing foods that you like.
Yeah.
And then working out when you feel the best. And I love what you said about the spinach, because I'm all for intuitive eating, but not when it means I feel like having a donut, I'll have 3 donuts. More like when you find the foods that really love you back, that you also love, then having them until you feel full, that's the approach that seems to work best for most people. So the foods that tend to work best are animal foods because they're the most nutritious and they tend to have fat that comes with them. And that's what you need on a ketogenic diet, because if you're reducing carbohydrates sometimes down to as low as under 20 grams a day to get ketogenic, then you need to get your calories from somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think part of the controversy of a ketogenic diet is that very often people talk about using, beef, lamb, coconut oil, butter, ghee, and these all have high saturated fat. And I think the idea that saturated fat is bad for you is just a zombie myth that will not die. And
trans fats are completely different.
Trans fats are different.
Completely different.
Yeah,
Your body
exactly.
doesn't even recognize them.
No.
So that's not what we want. And you want lovely, big, fluffy HDL cholesterol in your body. Because when people say I've got higher cholesterol, I'm like, well, which one is it? You actually don't know from that test that you've just done. It could be the good one, the big fluffy one that you do want. So don't cry over it.
Even the LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, there's some amazing stuff going on. I would urge anyone who's worried about that, who's thinking about doing a ketogenic diet, to check out a guy called Nick Norwitz, right? PhD from Oxford, doing his medical degree at Harvard. He's not daft.
Yeah.
And he is on a ketogenic diet because it gave him amazing healing from, he was breaking loads of bones. He had ulcerative colitis. He was in a right state and it sorted him out. So he's very interested in that side of things, and he has very high LDL. So he thought, okay, here's an interesting experiment. I'll test to see what lowers my LDL cholesterol better when I'm on a high-fat ketogenic diet. Is it statin medication?
Yeah.
Or is it Oreo cookies?
Right.
So he did a trial on himself where he took statin medication for a couple of weeks, and then he took nothing for a couple of weeks, and then he tried Oreo cookies.
I mean,
like 6 to 12
Oreo cookies aren't keto though, are they?
No, not at all.
No, that's what I mean.
And his LDL dropped faster and by more on the Oreo cookies, right? So what are we saying here? That you need low LDL at any cost? Should you be having a dozen Oreos every day to lower your LDL? I think what LDL is doing is just misunderstood, and that it's actually just getting energy around the body, and it's the type of LDL that matters. But this is like why a lot of people get put off by keto, because they hear me saying something and I'm just some guy, and then they hear someone else saying something, and they might hear a professor at Oxford saying one thing, and a professor at Harvard arguing, saying the other. How are you meant to cope with that?
Let's take the vegans. How do you do a vegan ketogenic diet?
You can do it.
I mean, my hairdresser asked me this today, and I said, because I said, hang on a minute, Curtis, I said, you're vegetarian, right? And he said, yeah. And I was like, wow, what if you take vegetables off someone? What are they eating? Apologies for interrupting this podcast, but I need to ask a favour. If you're enjoying this podcast so far, then please hit that subscribe button right now. I'll be straight up and honest that I want to see this podcast grow and flourish into something that I'm really proud of. And the only way that I can do that is with your help. So if you've ever learned anything useful from these conversations, then please return the favour by liking, rating, subscribing, and maybe even sharing it with your friends. Thanks very much. Let's get back to the episode. Like, I was like, well, I was thinking to myself, like, avocado, could have that.
Yeah.
Olive oil.
Yeah.
Oils. But I was like, no, you can't have no meat, no fish. He didn't want to eat fish. And I was like, and I definitely don't believe in these fake meats, which are ultra processed. Stay away from them. Then I was like, beans, pulses, high in carbs, you can't have them. So I was like, what Greek yogurt?
I mean,
cheese?
As a vegan, you can't have them either.
Oh,
right?
no, yeah. No, of course you can't. You could have coconut, but it's ultra processed.
You can have coconut. That's certainly a brilliant source of fat, and it's possible. You need to supplement. I mean, this
is not a diet for the vegan movement, though. Essentially, you just couldn't do it.
There's a great Facebook group called Vegan Keto Made Simple, and they're totally honest about how deficient a vegan diet is. And I'm not trying to make enemies. It just is, right?
I mean, some people just do it for ethics. They don't care about their health. They just literally, he's the same. He's just like, no, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So there's no argument to have there.
Yeah. And I do get it, and I understand. And it almost always comes from a really good place. I actually don't think that there's a brilliant idea that carnivore is vegan. That carnivore, if you just have beef, right? An average person might eat a whole cow every year.
Yeah.
On average. And if that cow just lived on a farm and lived out its life and then you ate it, then one animal dies for your food every year. But if you're a vegan, then you're using bees to pollinate. A lot of them die. You have to kill groundhogs and gophers and mice and birds.
To harvest up the
and
the corn or whatever you're using in your products. Yeah.
And the numbers kind of vary, but it's an interesting idea that you actually kill the least number of animals by just eating beef. And then the environmental concerns I completely understand, but again, I think they're mistaken. So there's a brilliant book called Sacred Cow. And if anyone's interested in hearing another side of it, I would totally recommend it, because I was worried about that. Is it dangerous? Is it a problem? And honestly, I just don't think it is. So that's that side of things. But then in terms of nutrition, I think I worry about people who are on vegan and vegetarian diets, because it is harder to get the nutrients. And they're much more bioavailable in animal products, and usually more abundant. There's very few things that there's more nutrients in plants than animals in a normal portion. So again, what do people eat? Well, there's lots of ways to skin the cat, and I tend to go by how I feel, like you were talking about with the spinach. If I'm in the supermarket, I mean, that was because I was severely deficient. Sure. But you can totally feel it. I'm not like that now. I don't look at a bag. In fact, I'm horrible to my spinach. I buy it and I leave it in the fridge drawer, and then I'm like, oh, it's dead. It's now not usable. Yeah. I mean, I'll have it once in a while, maybe like lamb sag, something like that. Okay. But yeah. So vegan keto made simple for people who really, really want to do a vegan version. Vegetarian's easier, you know, if you cope with dairy, then you've got cheese and yogurt. I don't really cope with dairy, so I don't have any. I'll occasionally have some ghee or some cream, but only occasionally, because it affects my skin and my gut health, and I think there's good reasons why that happens. But eggs are basically a superfood.
Yeah,
and I think people do really well with eggs.
And so does my little girl. She starts with eggs and avocado with a piece of sourdough. So in your world, we're taking out the sourdough.
Potentially. I mean, someone who's what they call metabolically flexible, which just means that they can use carbs or fat as fuel very easily, then they might still be making ketones and having 100 grams of carbs a day. Ironically, those are the people who don't really need keto. It's the ones who are metabolically inflexible who struggle to...
How would we know?
Well, there's a few different ways you can tell. An insulin test is usually the best way, but they're not easy to get. They're probably about 70 quid if you wanted to do it at home. You could wear a continuous glucose monitor, get an idea, and you know, people like Glucose Goddess are interesting for showing graphs of how you respond to your food. But I think everyone's on a spectrum in that regard. Some people much worse than others. One of my favourite doctors, David Unwin, who is from Southport, just north of Liverpool, and he's been doing this with his patients for more than 10 years. His practice spends like 65 grand a year less on diabetes drugs than the nearby practices. Like if you did that across the NHS, you'd save hundreds of millions.
Can I just tell you, I was just chatting to someone this morning, and I was like, oh, they got an election May the 4th. Thought, fucking who am I even going to bother voting for? Because they're all useless. There is one way you could win my vote, and if any single one of them turned around and said, we are going to fix the health of everybody in this country, and this is how we're doing it. Everybody, it's now law to eat whole foods, and everything else is out. Reinventing the supermarkets, it's out. British farming would boom. Everyone would get healthier. The NHS would not be crippled for heart disease, diabetes, chronic inflammation. Look at how many diseases you would fix. And it has to start in nurseries and schools. I have pulled my child out of nursery because I hated what they were feeding her. Vegan sausage rolls and ultra processed shit. I was like, we shouldn't even start nursery because I saw what they were feeding her. And I was like, what? I'm not doing it. So now she has a childminder who I'm in control. I sound like I've got disordered eating purely because I'm so hot on. I do not want her to grow up in a world of ultra processed food, but everybody thinks I'm neurotic and mental. Right? It's
topsy-turvy. And what you just said, I think we can finish.
And I thought, well, how do we get the country better? So then we fix metabolic health, and we try and fix a lot of the conditions that come with lifestyle problems. You're all about mental health.
Yes.
We fix a lot of that through diet.
Yes.
So it's a win-win for everybody, but it's got to become law. It's literally got to come from the bottom. It starts in nurseries and schools. You've got to reinvent what they're having in schools, because then it becomes a whole lifestyle throughout the family. And why wouldn't you want Britain to be, we are the fat man of Europe.
Yeah.
It's just a shit show. It's only getting worse because now we're not in the EU. So now we're not governed by EU law. So now we're having like more American style manufacturing, more salt, more sugar, more bullshit. And the NHS is at breaking point.
I know, it's
and you could literally just fix that one thing.
It's crazy.
And it would absolutely have a massive ripple effect over the next 50 years. Watch what would happen.
Totally. And I think it tends to be competing incentives, right? So I know a doctor who spoke to a former health secretary who himself had lost weight on low carb and said, why not roll it out? And this former health secretary said, well, big food companies and big pharmaceutical companies.
Who do you think funds them to be in office?
Fund a lot of the MPs.
Of course.
And so it's difficult.
So where's that money coming from? people like me,
Yeah.
right? So, and bigger companies who are really all about health. And, I think more donors who are really interested in this need to get either put themselves in a position where they're going to take it on, or they need to start funding people who are definitely on board with it.
Absolutely. And that bottom-up approach that you're talking about is super powerful. I love the idea of doing it in schools. There's Public Health Collaboration is a charity that I'm as involved with as I can. It's a brilliant organization, and they've got a schools part of their work to try to educate. And I don't know if you've heard of Chefs in Schools.
Right, no.
It's a pilot where they tested out what would happen if they got trained chefs to go in with the existing budget, and they were to just use whole foods, and the chefs came in under budget easily.
Right.
But the way that you get to the situation we're in now is partly ideological. So the processed vegan stuff is starting to creep in because of, I think, mistaken beliefs about that.
Yeah.
But also because if you're a procurement manager for a big educational or even NHS organization, and you need to ensure that there's going to be a food supply for the next 2 months, and then you choose organizations that sell you frozen chicken nuggets that'll sit for 2 months if you can't get them on that day. And their incentives aren't about, evil big pharma, big food stuff.
No, it's not. It's more like, these are the constraints. We need to feed the kids. Like,
exactly.
We need to feed the kids. That's the end of the day.
Exactly. But
maybe I'm living in a completely mental, ideological world, but I want to fund like urban farms.
Totally.
Like hydroponic farms, because I watch Clarkson's Farm all the time, and the weather has such a huge impact on next year's crop rotation or whatever. And I was like, well, that's not sustainable. What can we do? There is an urban farm in Liverpool that I was so interested in. They do loads of hydroponics. And I was like, what? And it's in a cellar, in these like big warehouses. And I was like, so you can do them in cities, cellars. We've got the technology to do that now. So this is my manifesto anyway. I'm in office. This is, and it's going to take me 50 to 100 years to actually really see.
Yeah.
But my God, how do you stop the country from being so obese? The NHS is at breaking point. Okay, let's fix all these diseases. What's the root cause problem? Nutritional deficiencies, terrible processed junk food. And it also has to start with education, because mums just don't know they're doing anything wrong, really.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, marketing has a big part to play. You go down like the aisle and you see something that has on the front no nasties, this many pom bears made with natural ingredients, blah, blah. It's processed shit, right? And it's having to tell me how good it is on those pom bears to make me buy it. Then, you've got like other stuff that like Baby Bells, like garbage, and all these other things that are aimed at kids, which are just absolutely awful. But I know, like, when my little girl's not with me, that's what's getting bought for her, because nobody knows any better. I'm even like against like packet ham and stuff like that, because I'm like, oh, it's processed ham, and everyone goes, it's like Slicer and the Pig, isn't it? I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's like reconditioned crap with loads of preservatives in it,
blended
chemicals
up,
in it.
Boiled.
Yeah. And, everyone's like, oh, just put that on the sandwiches. And that's again what I saw at this nursery. And this is, by the way, one of the most expensive nurseries in the Northwest. It's nearly £100 a day. Nearly £100 a day. And I was like, if they ask me for feedback of why she's not going to go there, I'm going to have to say, I'm sorry, it was your lunches.
Yeah, there's this, and it's both ends of life as well. There's this amazing guy called Hal Cranmer in America, who owns several care homes for the elderly, and he's actually started to feed them steak and veg, basically. And some people are coming in with dementia diagnoses, eating properly for the first time in decades, and actually going home and functioning again. It's no wonder that Joe Wicks noticed the link recently between ADHD behaviour and food.
I was going to ask you about this.
The other end of life as well.
Yeah.
They're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this was the other thing. So ADHD and attention deficit disorders and behavioural issues are rampant in our children. ADHD particularly, I'm seeing everywhere. Loads of people on LinkedIn are claiming to have it. Whether they're actually been diagnosed or they're diagnosing themselves, I don't know. Who cares? But it's more prevalent than ever. Is that, do you think, because our lifestyles, modern society, is it creating? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Or are people, it's just more people are talking about it and they're recognizing their symptoms?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. And I think there is a group of people that says ADHD and other developmental things are just that. They're developmental and they're neurodivergent.
Yes.
So saying that, you're fine as you are, you're just in the wrong situation and it's the modern environment. And I would say that we just have not evolved over millions of years to be really dysfunctional. We just haven't. We would have died if we were feeling, anxious, depressed, couldn't concentrate on things properly. It just doesn't add up, right? So I think, I can't remember if I was saying to you beforehand, but I think there's traits with ADHD that are good, like lateral thinking, feeling creative, novelty seeking. You mentioned risk taking.
Yeah.
And I've definitely got all of them, even after feeling much, much better from the negatives, which would be like brain fog,
lack of organization.
Yeah, not very conscientious, can't get things done. Now I'll have multiple projects, but I'll actually do them and do them well. And
instead of like starting one, moving on to another, starting one, moving on to another.
And feel really positive about it. Whereas before I would feel really negative and I would have the brain fog and I couldn't focus properly. So I think people get mixed up between something that is evolutionary adapted and actually a problem. And I think ADHD is one of those ones where it's a bit of a blend. I think depression can be a little bit like that. I think a lot of people who are depressed, it resembles a kind of hibernation mode. And I think that's something that all mammals have. If you want to get through winter, then you might have to get fat in the autumn and then not do very much until there's more food. And there's even really interesting cases of humans doing that in the modern age. There's this, you can Google it. There's a village in Russia where it was so cold, they would, when it came to winter, they would literally just close their doors, have a little fire going and sleep 23 hours of the day, wake up, have a potato and go back to sleep and do nothing for months. And it was just everyone took turns to tend the fire.
Right.
So we do have this ability to lower our metabolism, lower our mood, and not do as much, which sounds like depression to me. But that's not what we want day to day. We want to feel like a summer bear who's ready to go out and see the world and find food. So that's kind of, I think, at its best, what a ketogenic diet and metabolic psychiatry does for people. It helps them to feel that zest for life and like they're a summer animal rather than like a winter potato rushing. Yeah.
I totally agree with keto. For me personally though, I would really miss veg. I love it. You're taking sweet potatoes off me and I love them.
Yeah.
I love a baked sweet potato.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
I know. So I just don't know if I could give it up like fully. And then in my head, it's like, it can't compute. I'm like, how is this apple, banana, carrot that I'm so attracted to and drawn to and like absolutely love?
Yeah.
How is it not good for me? It's full of phytochemicals, phytonutrients. They're all working in harmony. The gut diversity. Is there, I worry about...
Gut diversity is fascinating. I think it's the Wild West at the moment and we don't really understand the full mechanisms. There's different species of bacteria, virus, fungi that live there, which do different things, but we don't know which does those things for sure. neurotransmitters are mainly made in the gut by bacteria, and it's clear that there's an imbalance of gut microbiome in people who have problems, whether that's, gut issues, mental health issues, which usually go hand in hand. And for so many people, having fruit and veg doesn't make them feel bad. And they can eat until they're full, and they don't put on weight, and they feel good mentally. And I don't think that carbs are the devil. But for some people, especially if their gut's already not good, then what they find is that when they cut down on the sugar and the starch and the fiber, that they just feel much better.
Okay.
Because if there is that gut imbalance, then you can fuel it in a bad way by giving it what it wants. And it starts to adjust in a positive way if you starve the bad microbes. So thinking about Weston Price again, who saw all these people eating carbs and who were fine. Those people would have been born not cesarean. And I understand why people get cesareans. I'm not saying it's evil or anything, but if you're born cesarean, then you're born almost sterile.
Oh, I get it. Listen, I was in labour for 2 days because of this reason, because I know exactly what you're going to say, because you need to have that vaginal birth even to get that big dose of bacteria. And I'm like David Goggins hanging in there for 48 hours.
Man.
And they were like, give it up. You've had everything now. And I was like, fuck's sake. And she's at 9.5 centimetres. She's not coming out. We need to get baby out. And I was like, that's it. Epidural in the back. And she's coming out the sunroof. That was an emergency.
The sunroof.
And that was an emergency C-section.
I totally get it.
So I was like, and the reason I was hanging, I let them induce me for 2 hours before I let them give me an epidural, just to give it one last chance, because I wanted to just come out naturally, purely from knowing this, right?
Yeah.
And everyone else was like, fuck that. They just have an elective C-section. And I'm like, are you not worried about their gut microbiome?
Yeah.
Whereas I am.
And sometimes now I know that they swab the mouth of the baby born C-section to try to get some of that there, because otherwise it's the hands of the midwife that is, whatever's on their hands is going to be the first thing that inoculates the baby. So it's a funny one, but
they're sterile anyway, because they've got gloves on.
Theoretically. But we're doing that sort of thing, and you just don't know. So anyway,
I've got pictures. So I was like, oh
no. The Weston Price people who were living basically in the Garden of Eden, they were, not born cesarean. They didn't have rounds and rounds of antibiotics when they were kids. And again, I'm not against antibiotics. If you've got an infection, you'd rather have antibiotics than die. But it decimates, every time you have a round of them, it decimates the microbiome, and you don't know how it's going to grow back. Also, modern ultra-processed foods, sugar, flour, vegetable oils cause havoc and make strains of bacteria that you don't want there grow rapidly. And not just in the large intestine, but all the way from the mouth through the stomach and the small intestine, where you don't want loads of the wrong bacteria. So I think those people who Weston Price saw, they can have carbs until the cows come home, because they're fine. They're living in the Garden of Eden, never had these impairments. Whereas us in the West, and now more increasingly in Global South as well, we've given ourselves all of these issues. And so that's why I think a ketogenic diet can be so powerful, is because you're starving those pathogenic microbes, whether that's bacteria, viruses, fungus, mold, all these things that can get in and live rent free. You starve them, and so you feel better.
Okay.
That's one of the methods. That's one of the ways.
Okay, so I'm going to make my partner become keto. He needs this more than me. I'm pretty good with my eating. I start my day with eggs. I could give or take bread, to be honest, again, just to keep the carbs low and the calories low. But like, I've just had a salad before we got here today, which was chicken, leaves, vegetables, unfortunately, like beans and stuff, edamame beans. But I'm going to make him go keto. What am I cooking for him? Steak, chicken, fish, pork, bacon. See, I have a problem with bacon.
What's the problem with bacon?
It's like processed.
Yeah.
So I stay away from anything that's had been, if it's not come from its whole state, no.
Yeah. And I think there's a question mark for me about the health of pork and chicken, the way it's raised commercially,
Yes.
because those animals have one stomach. So when you feed them grains and soy, which most of them are, corn and soy, then the type of fat that they end up making in their bodies is similar to the processed vegetable oils that you get.
So if I'm seeing corn-fed chicken,
No good.
oh really? So I'm thinking I'm doing the best thing by having a corn-fed chicken because it actually has it on the front of the packet.
Chicken, I think, is actually quite difficult to make super healthy. I don't eat it very much. And if I roast a chicken, I'll throw away the fat that comes off and replace it with beef dripping, because I think beef dripping is the healthiest fat that's available.
If I saw beef dripping on a menu, I'd stay fucking well clear of it.
It doesn't have the best image.
Beef dripping chips. No, thank you. Couldn't be worse.
And so pork, you can get a little better by choosing heritage breed, and especially if the farmer's not fed it corn and soy. So if they feed it wheat, that's fine, because the fat that gets made in the animal is so much healthier. But then if you find that, it's usually about the same price as beef. So I just tend to buy lots of beef.
Okay.
But again, it depends what your partner likes.
Yeah, that's true.
But I do go fish, shellfish, beef, lamb, some pork, some chicken sometimes, and bones. I do eat collagen, bone broth, use it in my cooking. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in traditional.
Which collagen are you taking? Bovine?
Yes. And I got a good deal on bulk because they did this mad sale this summer. But
I can tell you that it's probably shit. I can tell you from knowing a lot about this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not even getting past your stomach.
I've really like Hunter and Gather. Okay. They've got great marine collagen and bovine collagen. But there's obviously lots of good collagen out there and lots of less good collagen. Mm-hmm. But I think if you can be bothered boiling the bones or getting bone broth concentrate, in fact, my favorite hack is veal jus, which you can get for like 30 quid for a kilo. I'm not a vegan, but I'm not touching veal. It's fucking cruel. Oh, it certainly can be. But you can get, it's called...
Wait, straight up is cruel. You get a baby calf, just shove it in a box all its life.
Yeah, if it's raised like that, then no thanks.
Well, they are.
You can get lamb. You can get lamb jus. Similarly, it's essential cuisine. You get a kilo of it, and it's like restaurant quality sauce. Good to go. So, and you'd put that on like a gravy. Exactly. You can literally make a gravy in a moment, and it's restaurant quality. Or you can get bone broth concentrate and use that as a base. Basically, every traditional society boiled bones in the communal cooking pot because they knew that they needed that connective tissue, that collagen, and all of those amino acids that you don't get as much of with muscle meat. So there are some people who seem to do fine with just like steak and egg and that's it. But I don't. I actually did this wild experiment last October and the October before, and I'm planning to do it this year. I called it Mctober, right? Because all I ate for the whole month was McDonald's triple burgers without the bun and egg yolks cooked in beef dripping. And I had no idea how I would feel, but I thought this will be interesting. And I lost 6 kilos. I didn't know I had to lose. I felt absolutely amazing. And it was quite an experience. I feel like the quality of that meat is shocking though. I wouldn't be touching a McDonald's burger. Well, you say that, but it's all British and Irish beef, 100% beef. And they can get quite choosy in McDonald's with farmers. So they just have a particular part of the cow and they mince it centrally and freeze the patties. Mm-hmm. So they're also really low in histamine, which can be a problem for people. makes them feel ill, brain fog and all of that. And I think that was part of the reason I felt better as well. And they just use salt and pepper. They don't use any vegetable oils when they cook it. And I think people are quite surprised about that it's, British and Irish beef, which is almost all grass-fed.
Yeah.
And I think in America, it's probably different. They're probably coming from big feedlots and a lot more grain-fed. But we're quite lucky in the UK. And a lot of people were saying just what you said. So in February last year, I bought nothing but organic, pasture for life, beef and lamb. And that's all I ate, just like steaks, mince, slower cooked cuts, a little bit of offal. And I felt terrible. After 2 weeks, I had to abandon it. And I was thinking, what is the difference here? And I think, well, it's probably the egg yolks. And there was something in that I really needed.
Right.
So when people go sort of full carnivore and they're just having that, I think oftentimes that's not enough. And I think it's a really good idea to find these foods, if you're doing a ketogenic diet, that fit within a ketogenic diet that you really like, whether that's beef, lamb, pork, chicken, eggs, fish, shellfish. Cheese, if it works for you, absolutely.
It's ultra processed again, though.
I mean,
I try and live my life without getting manufacturers who've had their hands all over it.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
The only one I really will go with is like goat's cheese or feta.
Yeah, a lot of people do better with goat's cheese, sheep's cheese, or A2, cow's dairy, where it's a different type of protein.
Yeah.
It's harder to get in the UK. They're bigger on that in Australia.
Okay. I've got one more question that I want to do with you before we wrap up. Gluten.
Gluten, yeah. Terrible.
So I try and stay away from gluten. Again, just choose foods that are naturally gluten-free. I'm not going down the free from aisle, which is, again, ultra-processed bullshit with gluten taken out of it. Go for foods that are naturally gluten-free. Again, I'm not celiac. I could probably tolerate it, but I feel better without it.
There you go. And honestly, I think gluten is so menacing for so many people.
Yeah.
And it's totally clear, established in the scientific literature. There's nothing controversial about what I'm about to say, that some neurological and mental health disorders, some of the most serious ones like schizophrenia, Parkinson's, are directly caused by gluten. Not all of them. I think we should be saying schizophrenias rather than schizophrenia because there's different ways into it. But it's totally clear that for some people, gluten causes schizophrenia. So there's some people whose lives are absolutely ruined because of bread and pasta.
For sure. And also I would imagine it's a spectrum. Like you've got people who are celiac at one end of the spectrum, absolutely cannot tolerate it, and you'll know about it if you've eaten it. And you've got people at the other end of the spectrum who probably could tolerate it, but it would, give them low level inflammation in some way. And it's, I don't know, manifesting itself in some kind of situation,
Even the people who have celiac, though, sometimes they don't have symptoms.
Yeah, I would 100% say that 100% of people would feel better without it.
Almost certainly. And sometimes celiac is only diagnosed when people get colon cancer from gluten exposure, because that is a huge risk for people with celiac. But you don't always have symptoms. So people can go their whole life eating gluten, not knowing that they're chipping away at their resilience against even things like cancer. I think what I always say to people, because I don't want to alarm people, but Weston Price saw the Swiss, for example, having lots of cheese and fermented sourdough rye bread. That would have probably had 10% of the gluten level that we have in modern bread. Modern bread will be laced with glyphosate and other pesticides that remain in the grains. So there's all sorts of different problems with modern wheat. And I think if you can get sourdough rye, then you're probably doing a lot better than if you're getting supermarket standard sort of Hovis or whatever. But
what about supermarket sourdough?
I mean,
I don't believe that they're doing their due diligence and making it in the same way that a traditional artisan sourdough maker would be making it.
Agreed. And I think what you said is bang on for any of these things: gluten, dairy, carbs. The only way to really know is to eliminate them for a time, see how you feel, and eliminate all of them at the same time. Because if two of them are going to cause you problems and you just eliminate one, you won't know because the other one's still causing problems. So do an elimination diet, and all those foods are still going to be there in a couple of months. But what if you do it and your life changes and you feel like a new person? You can still eat like you were before, but you've got that choice now. It's so powerful. The food, no one's taking the foods away forever. So if you can try it for a couple of months, you might just find that your life turns around. I mean,
sure. I completely, well, again, I want to really, I completely agree with you on everything you've pretty much said today. And I really want people to do it. It's so hard though. It's really hard because then you get people saying, well, I can't afford to eat grass-fed, organic, this, that and the other.
I totally get it. And actually my staple is beef mince, fatty beef mince, and I cook it in all different ways. I actually wrote a cookbook with a friend of mine who used to work at Intolerances, John Meehan, brilliant chef. My book's called Low Carb on a Budget, and you can get it on Amazon. And it tries to show people that they can do it and they can select the ones that they like. And I tend to only have half a dozen meals regularly. But I think the other thing that's difficult for people is this sense of maybe even food addiction. And it's a controversial term, but I think some people do need that support. They do need to, I think that's one thing that groups like Weight Watchers and Slimming World get right, even though they get a lot wrong, is that camaraderie.
Community
is important.
The group. Yeah. Ali, I'm going to have to wrap it up here because we are out of time, unfortunately. But if people want to get hold of you, where can they get hold of you? I can be found on Twitter and Instagram at Ali Transforms, ALLY, and on my website, metsy.com, METPSY. Okay, brilliant. I'm definitely going to have you back because I want to hear all about Metsy, which we didn't even get onto. I know. And next year, I'm doing a study at Oxford on Metsy, ketogenic diet for ADHD with depression. And before that, we're going to do a trial in the community where people can try a ketogenic diet and wear a continuous glucose monitor and an Oura ring and see if it improves their ADHD symptoms. So if people follow me, then they can find out about that, and maybe I can come on in a year and tell you how everything went. 100%. I definitely think we should get you back sooner than that anyway, because we could talk about this forever. But yeah, really appreciate you coming down, and can't wait to chat to you again. Thank you so much. Thank you.